Good evening and welcome. Tonight we speak with the CEO of the Fijian Competition and Consumer Commission, Mr. Joel Abraham. Mr. Abraham, always a pleasure to have you with us.
Pleasure to be here.
So we've invited you over so that we can discuss a whole range of issues and discuss the work of the Fccc that's been done in the past few months. Starting with EFL's proposed tariff increase, we'd like to spend a bit of time on that. So the deadline for submissions and public consultation following the proposed tariff has been extended to the 28th. So far, many submissions have been received. What sort of conversation is taking place during these submissions?
Yeah, thank you, Ziad. As you're aware, the company Energy Fiji Limited put in a proposal, and the proposal was for 17.2% increase in tariffs. Now, 17.2%, say, for domestic or residential customers equates to about 5.77 cents, right? So currently it sits at around 33 cents. The proposal is to increase it by a further 5 cents. And the proposal was given after a study was done by the Asian Development Bank, saying that the cost of providing electricity, the cost of generating, transmitting, distributing it is quite expensive, and for the last so many years there has not been a review done. Now, the last tariff review that we did was in 2010, and based on that there were some gradual implementations that was done in 2011. And then in 2013, via the budget announcement, the government had reduced tariff by 5 cents, and 5%, sorry. And so EFL has come back and said for EFL to be a company that is able to ensure investments into renewable energy, is able to meet all its obligation, that they would want a 17% increase. Now, as far as the Fccc is concerned, we are the regulators, and given that EFL is a monopoly, it is our role to ensure that we are able to mimic a competitive market. So the first thing that we do when we receive such a submission is, in the interest of transparency, to make it public. And so we got the submission that they had done and put it on our website, so that it's there for people to be able to access it, to read it, to give their comments and their feedback. Now, the people have, quite a lot of them have participated in this process. The face-to-face consultations was one medium of getting comments and feedback. Over 4,400 people participated in it. In Lambasa alone, the best turnout, I must say. We got more than 1,500, 1,600 people in a 2-hour slot. So the interest was quite high. Now, surprisingly, there were interest from people wanting to give in submissions from islands where EFL doesn't provide electricity. So we got requests from the Lau group, from Kandabu, from Overlau. People said, "Come in, can you come and take our submission?" So we dispatched teams to go out in these areas. And people participated. Generally, you'd expect that people would come out and say, "Look, we don't want an increase." And so somebody asked me, said, it's quite a silly exercise that you guys are doing. Of course, nobody will want any increase, but you're still going out and doing all these consultations. So I said, okay, let me explain to you how this works. Now, if there was a competitive market in Fiji, so there was about 4 or 5 different providers of electricity, what would have happened is, as soon as somebody would have raised their prices or sought to have a price increase, the others would actually start looking at the market, right? So that send their sales and marketing, advertising teams, and do a demand survey. What's happening in the market? What are people saying? What are people thinking? And then they would structure their different products differently to be able to gain a competitive edge. Now, that's not the case in Fiji. Now, if that were so, regulation would not be required. Forces of demand and supply would be able to set prices. Now, what we do is, when we go out and we talk to people, we're trying to ensure that we are still working or operating as if the market was competitive. So we're still listening to the people. I think it's quite unfair for people to say that, generally people will say no, so you shouldn't ask anybody, and it's one of those situations where if you do the consultation, then people come out and say, why are you doing a consultation? It's a wasteful exercise. And if you don't do it, they say, oh, you didn't ask anybody,
Because on the other hand, there has been, public criticism saying the EFL, because it's a monopoly, is trying to strong arm, the people of Fiji.
Yes, and so Fccc owes a duty of care to the Fijian people to make sure that, one, we ask the people, but while there's a team doing this public consultation exercise, there's another team going through 10 years of EFL's financial data to see whether financially an increase is justifiable or not, and whether if there's investments into renewable energy, we must be able to hold them to account and say, if you're making any investments, when will these investments be done? What are the possible benefits that Fijians are expected to derive out of it, and what's going to happen now? We've looked at some of the arguments that they put forth. They've said Monosavu was built in the 70s, and when it was commissioned, it's been so many years that we'll be reaping benefit now. Given that there was a drought in 2014 where they spent about 57 million, and then there was a TC Winston where they spent 32 million, and then there was fuel price hikes for which they did not seek any tariff changes, and they absorbed it, right? And so they've come in, they've made their arguments. Now, our job is basically to look at whether there's adequate justification that exists, right? And if the justification does exist, we'll make a ruling accordingly. If it doesn't, we'll make a ruling accordingly. What's important is that people need to participate in the process. I've said this so many times. This is a public policy process. People must come in and participate. Now, I think there's some politicians that have also put in their submissions, right? There are others that are doing the grand gesturing, where going out in media and making statements, but haven't made any submissions, right? I think the important thing is when people elect you and people put you, what you need to do is work in their best interest as well. So every Fijian may not have the capacity to review the financial data for EFL, or to look at what they've put in their submission, but definitely there are people with good academic qualifications that have some idea of how to read the submissions. We were expecting some submissions to come in, but they did not come forward. The Fiji Labour Party has made a submission, and I briefly met with Honorable Linda in Savu. She informally, we had some discussion. So definitely people are coming forward. They're expressing some interest, and we commend them for doing that. And I constantly remind everybody in Fiji that Fccc is an independent body, and during this budget announcement, the classification was also moved to classify Fccc as an independent commission. So.
So can you talk to us about some of the submissions by the ordinary Fijian? What are some of their concerns? What have they raised?
Sure. I mean, there's quite a few people that have come out and said, look, I don't want an increase. Right? 17% is too much. Some people were confusing 17% with 17 cents. They said, we can't afford 17 cents. We said, no, 17% is 5 cents. I said, oh, if it's 5 cents, maybe give them 2, So people ended up negotiating. There's a group of people that would have said, no increase. The others came and said, 17% is too much, something less. Others came and said, okay, 17%, but what are they going to do? We need for them to tell us which projects they're going to invest in, how fast will we meet our renewable energy targets, how is this going to be good for the environment. The people, there was a lady in Ba, right? An elderly lady, and she came and said, she gave a submission in the Hindustani language, and she said, I understand what they've said, and our environment is important, and we must safeguard this for future generation. If they can give us a commitment on by when they will reach 80, 90, 100% renewable energy, then we can consider it. So very mixed reactions, contrary to what people would say. Say from Levuka, from Kandavu. Kandavu was an interesting one, where people said, we support an increase, because if EFL gets an increase, then possibly they would consider investing into infrastructure in Kandavu. And so we went to Savu, and people said, we generally find that there's some power outages in Savu.
Right.
Why should we pay for people in Vitilevu? Or why? And then some people in Vitilevu said, we're subsidizing for people in Vanwalevu.
So this is such an important conversation,
Yes, it
and
is.
so we'll take this on to the next segment. We'll be right back after a break. Carrying on the conversation from the last segment around the EFL's proposed tariff increase. So Mr. Patel has said in the media that the EFL has been incurring losses for the past few years, and in fact ever since the 2013 decrease. On the other hand, a lot of people, of course, as you said, are not willing to accept that it's a 17% increase. So you also mentioned that there are two separate teams assessing the financial data that's given. Talk to us about how that works.
Yeah, so we have a team of analysts, and these are analysts that have accounting, audit, finance backgrounds that are basically combing through the financials. So we are not only reviewing it, we are in fact doing a regulatory audit looking at whether some of these numbers make sense. Right? So what we do is we actually go out, we look at the financial statement and we question each and every number. So an auditor may qualify, give assurance that everything's right with it. What we do is we go one step further and we say, for the purpose of regulatory pricing, should this expenditure be allowed? Now, if there's some grand expenses in there, we say, no, this should be taken out, this should be taken out. So it's not per se purely the audited financial statement, whatever is there, we just accept it. What we do is we go a step further, we analyze and scrutinize the numbers further. We ask for supporting details, we go back and say, were all these expenses really needed? If not, people should not be made to pay for it. And that is why when we go out and do consultations, in fact, the experience is priceless. I myself attended the consultations. Our general manager operations was there. One of our ODI fellows, Jamie, is from the UK. He was there with us on the ground. And we get to hear the views of so many Fijians. And I think we should not generally be dismissive that, people, they don't have academic qualifications, so they don't know. There's so many people who are very bright and they've given us a lot to think about. And they come out, and while we're there for EFL, they come in and offer their views on so many other things. And I personally give them my contact and I say, please keep in touch and continue to give us your views and your feedback, because Fccc is there to listen to everybody, and we believe that we must always be on the ground listening to people. That experience, I must say, is priceless. So,
one example that you gave was you went to an outer island and someone, was asking for the infrastructure to be put in the first place.
Yeah. So people have a very forward way of thinking, and our people on the ground, even if they are farmers, even if they work in as casual laborers, they come in and they give such good submissions, and people would generally, you generally would not think that this person is just a farmer. So a lot of street smart people, and they've given us so many good things to think about, and to the point sometimes when they come for these submissions, they talk about so many other things, and they say, you could do this in this particular way. So they come in and they give us suggestions and they give us ideas, and that is how Fccc is always managed to stay in the forefront of consumer protection, and that is by listening to people. And we don't discriminate people based on where they've studied or where they're from. We believe everybody's got a very unique perspective, and generally it's for me personally, it's a very satisfying experience.
Now, speaking of forward thinking, earlier this week, Vinod Patel became the first company to sign a voluntary compliance framework agreement with the Fccc. Talk to us about that.
Yes, so the voluntary compliance agreement, the framework itself is something that I worked on in 2013. At that time, I was a manager at Fccc, and I was sitting down, and I had a task to write a particular paper. I was given no topic. They said, you need to come up with something innovative. So as I was sitting, I was looking at our compliance numbers, and since Commerce Commission days and when I became CEO, compliance levels generally were low. We charge traders quite often, take them to court, impose fines. And so one of the things I was looking at is why do we have such a high incidence of fines, you know? Why do people continuously not follow the law? You know, what's wrong with people? And so I looked back into my own experience and my own personal beliefs, and the inspiration for this voluntary compliance framework came from a story in the Bible where there's a story of a woman caught in the act of adultery, and people catch her and bring her to Jesus and say, this woman has been caught, the law says you have to stone her. What do you say? So he says, he that is without sin, let him cast the first stone. Then it bends down and starts writing something on the ground, and everybody leaves. So he gets up and says, where are your accusers? And the woman says, no sir, everybody's left. So he said, has no one accused? He said, no sir, not even one. He said, neither do I, go sin no more. That showed to me that mercy is more powerful than punishment. And so I took that inspiration and I said, what if we came up with an approach that was collaborative in nature, where we were able to go with leniency but at the same time achieve high degree of compliance. So, and then I wrote that framework, and that was at Fccc, never tested, never piloted. And so when I became CEO in 2016, one of the first things I did was looked at our compliance level, still set at 55%. We'd collected over $400,000 in fine. And so I said, the first thing we'll do is suspend all fines. And my staff were like, so what should we do? We said, we'll go and we will use advocacy, we'll talk to them, we'll ask them nicely. I said, sometimes if you want something done, just ask nicely. And I remember being at a shop in Nandawa, and there was this old gentleman, he was running a shop and he was overcharging on gas for 10 cents. And so I said to him, I say, uncle, you're overcharging for 10 cents. The fine is 3,000. How many 10 cents will you have to collect to pay this 3,000 fine? Why do you do this? You know? The reason with him. I said, and then he said, you know, beta, will you fine me? I said, no, we're not going to fine you. I'm just telling you. But next time we're coming, we will fine you. But this is an advice. Believe me, next 5 follow-ups that we did, he shopped not only in that, but in all other aspects, 100% compliant. And that confirmed to me that mercy was indeed more powerful than punishment. And so we went ahead, put together a framework, presented it to the board, got it approved, and then we started working. And we said we need to pilot it. And I must thank Vinod Patel. They were quite eager about this. Their CEO, Mr. Viral Patel, was on board, and he said we want to do it. He pushed from his end. And so we've signed an agreement with them. I would say what the compliance framework basically does, it allows consumers, if they've got issues in Vinod Patel, to be able to lodge a complaint in Vinod Patel. Now, one of the major issues that I usually face with consumer protection is, if you've had some issues with the trader, you have to pay your fare to come to the Fccc office to lodge your complaint. It's an additional cost to the consumer. And what we're trying to do is reduce that burden to the consumer. So if there's any issues in Vinod Patel, you are able to lodge that complaint with Vinod Patel in Vinod Patel. And what they do is they put it in a register, and they're given a 7-day time frame. You resolve it. If you're not able to resolve it, it passes to Fccc. The consumer need not then come and lodge a complaint at Fccc. What we'll do is we'll take it from there and ensure that we do all the due diligence, all the investigation is done accordingly. So doesn't take Vinod Patel off the hook. What it does, it shows that they have a commitment to proactively try and resolve consumer issues.
We'll have more for you right after the break. Mr. Abraham, before we move on further in the conversation, just 2 follow-up questions in relation to the EFL tariff increase. Firstly, recently there was a consultation held in Sabu Sabu where a businessman noted the low turnout, and he said the Fccc needs to work on its outreach.
Sure.
So has turnout been consistent everywhere?
Yes, generally it was quite an interesting statement. He said, we weren't informed, but he still turned up to the event. His bone of contention was, and I had certain issues with that, simply because it almost seemed out of the ordinary. The gentleman came with a journalist and left with a journalist, and unfortunately the journalist was not interested in what anybody else had to say. Mr. Nunek was able to he gave a lot of good points as well, and the turnout in Sabu Sabu was good. The turnout in the northern division generally was really good. Now, when I say really good is in terms of public consultations. Having about 1,500 people turn up in a 2-hour time window is high. So contrary to what he's saying, which I think information he was not privy to, we were able to reach out to people, and I think there's a general lack of understanding. What FCCC does is we look at the most effective means of advertising, word of mouth, people talking to other people, using traditional mediums, but also social media as well as news. I think if we did not advertise in, say, FBC, right, we definitely had the news segments talking about EFL consultation, so people were aware. So it's not that I think it's it's an unfair comment to say, oh, people don't know. People know. Generally, there were also instances, I can tell you an example where we're sitting in Lotoka in the tent at Shelley Park. Right? We purposefully put it in Shelley Park because there is a rock, one of their rock market kind of concepts, Right. And so there were people passing the tent, right? Everything was the EFL consultations. They came, they said, oh, what is this for? We said, oh, it's to do with the proposed 17% increase. We want to get your views. They said, oh yeah, we'll come back later. I think it's also onus on the people to be able to participate in the process. So we changed our strategy a bit this time around. We had people sitting in the tent, but we also had officers that were out under a tree sitting and talking to somebody and say, what is your comment? What is your feedback? The people in buses, right, traveling in buses asking for comments. People, we've got pictures of our staff that were in cane farms. So when cane was actually being harvested, when it was loaded, these guys are sitting down on the, those mats, pal, what do they call it? Yeah. Sitting down on the pal, and they're talking to farmers and they're asking for their views. What do you think? So
it's not just a lecture hall type situation.
No, it's not. Yeah. So FCCC is always undertaken consultation. We've had good turnouts. We've had really poor ones.
So you've talked to us about in the West and in the Northern Division, but what about in the Central Eastern Division, especially in areas that are highly densely populated with people? What about those areas?
Yeah, no, in the Central Division also we had good turnout. People came the first day. I think in the first session we had more than 300 or something people turn up in 2 hours, which is a high number. And they came asking for information. I think it was the first one. And generally, the first one is slow, but this time around, I think that set the pace for the consultation in itself.
So, just another question on that. So, as you've alluded to, I think in the first segment, and Mr. Hasmukh Patel has also said to the media that the last time there was an increase in 2011, he was able to complete a major capital project for the EFL. He's also stated that, quote, we need to develop new projects that will cater for the electricity requirements of the people of Fiji in the future. One popular critique of such statements made by Mr. Patel is that as any other business operates, if he wants to undergo capital projects, he should just apply for a loan like any other business is required to do. Sure. Perhaps more suited a question to ask Mr. Patel directly, but would you like to comment on that?
Yeah, so generally you would look at an entity that's regulated, their revenue stream. So we work on a system called allowable revenues, right? And so when the Nandari Batu project was happening, or when any other project, so if you're looking at AFL and the airport upgrades, before they are able to do any of this, they have to prepare a statement of cash flow and submit it to the bank to say, oh, this is how I'll get money and this is how I'll be able to repay you. Now, if the business is not regulated, you can increase your revenue, you can change it and give an incremental revenue stream, right? Generally, accountants will tell you they do that, right? So you'll show an incremental revenue that this year I'll do this much, next year I'll do that much, and it'll keep going on. My revenue will increase. But for regulated industry, it's generally going to be flat until and unless the regulator comes in and says, okay, yes, we allow for you to change the price because the price is fixed. And so whenever they are going out to banks, the banks are generally, or any lender would generally be critical and say, you don't have any incremental revenue, would you be able to meet the obligations? Now, As far as EFL is concerned, and you're quite right, Mr. Hasmukh would be in a much better position to talk to you about why they cannot do that. But generally, for regulated industries, that is one impediment for them because the price has generally been regulated. Now, if it was any other entity from 2011 onwards, the few years that they did Nandari Batu, and thereafter they should have looked at changing their revenue stream, which is changing what the tariff is. But they can't change the tariff by virtue that it's regulated. So if the market was unregulated, then the tariffs would have gone up and then come down and would have gone up and come down. So what we do is we provide stability. Generally, because electricity is very important, every business uses it, every household uses it, and people, for them to be able to plan their consumption, to be able to plan their budgets and all, we generally try and keep volatility out of prices. We want to keep prices as stable as we can. So rather than saying, okay, let's gradually increase it, we say, let's look at whether there is a need, right? And if there's no need, then we say there's no need, right? Okay. A good example will be bread still costs about 70 cents,
So when we come back from break, we'll get an update on the Langi Langi housing project. So, Mr. Abraham, we're now discussing the Langi Langi housing project. The Fccc, as I understand it, investigated the matter after complaints were received. And so in some matters, you've initiated legal proceedings as well. Could you tell us in a bit more detail what the initial investigation found?
Yeah, we got a few complaints, and people started coming in and talking about being promised a house, not receiving it, having paid substantial amount of deposits. And so we started looking into it, and then talking to the different ministries to see where they were at with this Langi Langi housing project. And then we found that the ministries had also started receiving some complaints. And so we discussed this with the Minister for Housing, and then subsequently the Minister asked for Fccc to undertake an inquiry under the provisions of the Fccc Act into what had happened to the Langi Langi housing, the whole project itself. So we went back all the way from when it started, from inception till date. And we started looking at the arrangement with government, where government gave $12.7 million. And then there were donor agencies like the Catholic Church in Germany. There's some other donor agencies that gave funding. And then the people within G2 Estate that were actually, through a saving scheme, putting money up. Now, the sad thing is that there was abuse of the entire process. As far as government funds were concerned, we did not find any abuse to government funds. So whatever was received from government was utilized in the manner it was supposed to be utilized. And I think the matter was also referred to Fccc, and Fccc came and did their due diligence on it, and I think they, from what I gather, they did not find anything as well. So we started looking into it. Now, Fccc has got a larger purview than Fccc. Fccc is able to look at government funds. We are able to look at anything and everything, anything that is relating to trade or commerce. We started looking at all of these things, and we started looking at the structures, and we started talking to people. We went on the ground. We had a team that was going out and doing surveys with people in G2 Estate. We're talking to them. And then we decided to do an advertisement, a TV advertisement, calling for people to come in and lodge a complaint. And at that time, somebody said to me, it's quite silly for Fccc to be doing that. He said, it's a waste of resources, given that this is concentrated to the people in G2 Estate. Now, after we did the advertisement, people from as far as Rambi lodged complaints, from Lambasa, from Lotoka. People had given $20,000 for a unit. And then we started finding out that what had actually happened is there were 80 families that were there where Langi Langi housing currently sits. They were asked to move across the road, build shacks and stay there. And when these houses were built, they would move back. These people are still on the other side of the road looking at others that have moved in there. Now, there are some people in there that they are, because they fall within the low income echelons, that they don't have the means and low cost housing is for them. But then there are other people that have the means, and we've partnered with the Financial Intelligence Unit and done various background checks on the existing tenants as well, and we found there's some that should not be there. There's some easy indicators. You go to a low-cost housing area and you see university students renting. So you say, this is not meant for them. So we did a lot of work on the ground, a lot of hard yards put in by the team at Fccc, and we went there after hours, met with the people, had various meetings, and gathered as much information as we could. Now, things that we found shocking: massive lapse in governance. So the people that were in charge of PCN basically did not administer the governance process in a proper manner. That led to various breakdowns and failures. Now, since then, I've seen that Father Kevin Ba has come on board and said, there were some of our employees did that, and the director has come and said some of our employees did that. But in the law, there's something called vicarious liability, where the employer is liable for the negligence of its employees. So it is the onus is on the employer to ensure that the employees don't engage in such a conduct, and that is why governance is such a strong thing. If you look at the general move of government, they've always moved to strengthen governance. Whether you're talking about the new Companies Act, or you're talking about the Code of Conduct, generally the move is to strengthen governance and bring more accountability and transparency.
Father Ba also, on that same note, he also seemed to be shifting the blame towards the Minister for Housing, Mr. Praveen Bala, saying that the funds were not released on time. Does that coincide with your investigation?
Yeah, just a correction, that's a former minister.
Right, right. Yeah.
Yes, so Father Kevin Ba also gave his statement. Now, we've asked him to come in for an interview. His lawyer has written to us and said he's in no condition to go through an interview. It was unfortunately presented to us via an email. We've written back to the doctor and said, give us a written response. And then we find that Father Kevin Ba spent a considerable amount of time talking to a Fiji Sun journalist, giving an interview, which is exactly what we were asking him to do. But this interview would be binding. So you can't just say anything, because we'll fact check everything that you say. So unfortunately, he's not come in to give his side of the story properly. He's given a statement. He's said something about the former minister. And of course, everybody that was there whose name has been brought up, we've gone ahead, we've brought them in, the Director of Housing, the former minister, everybody's been brought in to Fccc. Even the government ministers are not exempt from it. So they came in, they've given their side, they've given their statements as well. So we've looked at it in a very holistic manner. Our role was to make sure that we independently review this. And some of the things, like I've said, governance, major issue, misuse of funds, definitely, but not government funds. The funds that were misused were the ones that were collected from the people.
So we've done the checks and balances of what's happened in the lapse of governance in that particular project. Talk to us about whether the Fccc has any opportunities to talk to those who have been displaced in that particular area.
Yes, we've talked to almost everybody in that particular area, and some of the stories that you hear is really it'll really get to you, But our role is not to get emotional in all of this, but to make be objective and make decision based on facts. So we were looking at we listened to the plight of the people there. They're still there. They're still waiting. There were instances where people have alleged that initially, when the Prime Minister was asked to come in and give hand over the homes, these families were brought in, saying these are the displaced people. The PM spoke to them and said, yes, these are the displaced people. PM verified that. And they were given keys, and after they left, PCN staff went and collected the keys back from them and gave it to somebody else. So things as such, the allegations have come forward, and that is why we've asked people like Father Ba to come in for interviews, so that they're able to give their side of the story, because right now it's allegations from people. And people call us up and say, what's happening? In total, there are 370 complaints that have currently been registered. And so going through the 370, and you can't assume that PCN is at fault or PCN is liable or PCN did everything that's wrong. No. FCCC is objective here. We follow the facts, the evidences, and under the process of natural justice, we'll allow PCN to give their side of the story as well. And we'll let the evidence speak. And where the evidence says that there is sufficient ground, then of course we'll move for prosecution.
Now, before we bring this segment to an end, because for those displaced families, this has also become a social justice issue, what next? What form of restitution can they get?
Well, FCCC is limited in looking at the project in terms of an inquiry and follow on as an consumer protection enforcement agency, as looking at investigating the complaints that have come in. Now, people that have paid money and have not been given a flat, it is a breach, or prima facie it would seem like a breach of Section 88 of the FCCC Act, which is accepting payments without being able to supply. And the onus is on PCN to prove that there was intention to supply. And that is why we're going through the process. Now, as far as restitution is concerned, I understand that the current Minister for Housing, Honorable Premila Kumar, had announced that the Ministry of Housing will be taking over the project, and I think Honorable Minister would be in a much better position to comment on how they would look at it. But from where I see this, I think definitely these people need justice needs to be given to them, because when I went there, people came out and said, we've been running around this place for 10 years and we've not received any justice. And so I assured them, I said, generally when FCCC looks at anything, we ensure, being a consumer protection enforcement agency, we ensure that people get justice. So we'll continue to fight that good fight for all Fijians to make sure that every Fijian gets justice.
We'll be right back after another break.
Mr. Abraham, congratulations are in order. On Friday with the Westpac Women in Business Awards, FCCC won the Employer of Choice Awards. Congratulations on that. Usually this is given to organizations that promote equal opportunity in the workplace. Can you talk to us about your achievements in FCCC giving women the equal platform, especially with breaking that glass barrier?
Yeah, I mean, generally, this is for, I think it's quite simple for FCCC, given that we believe our general core principle is in having a level playing field in the Fijian market. Now, if we want the market to have a level playing field, I think we need to walk the talk at FCCC. And so when I started as CEO in 2016, we have 3 tiers of management at FCCC: executive, senior, and support management, which in total comprise of about 14 people. There's only 1 female manager. And so today we've got 7 and 7 male, 7 female. Now it's not a result of basically saying we will give preference to women, but at the same time it is about empowering them. So some of the things that we do, so instead of saying we'll put in quotas, we're saying we want to have equity in the system. And most of it was through general policies that we've put out, equal employment opportunity policies, women's mentoring policy. We've got programs for women. We're helping them in terms of ensuring that they go through proper training, get equal opportunities. So say when our HR runs any training, the HR does an analysis to ensure that the representation men to women is equal, right? It's the small things. You give everybody that opportunity to be able to grow. So when you look at capacity building, you're building capacity for your women as well. And I think that has given the women at FCCC the ability to increase their numbers from 2015 from 1 to 7 now. So there's 6 women in management now, 7 women in management, an increase of 6. And apart from that, we've done some very small things, I would say, which stems out from things that we learn ourselves. One instance is we provide hygiene products, or sanitary pads for women. We provide flexible time for new mothers, for women that are expecting. There was one instance where I had one of my project officers, and she had a very bad case of morning sickness when she was pregnant. So she would generally come to work late. And we gave her the flexible time. We said, okay, no, it's fine. We understand your body is going through changes, and we're here to support you and hold your hand through the process. And so one day I'm returning from one of my meetings, 7:30 p.m. I come into the office. Usually I'm in the office for some time in the evening, and I see her sitting, and I say, Christina, what are you doing in the office? And she says, oh, I have to cover for my extra hours. I came late. I said, no, you don't have to cover for extra hours. What you need to do is you need to be able to rest. 1, 2, you're covering more than enough because you're giving birth to life, you know. So that in itself is something that we at FCCC recognize. And as long as you're able to meet all the results, so we're very result oriented. We're not clock watchers. We don't say you have to come in at this time and leave at that time and have breaks during this time. It's generally free. And so for me, I personally see that women are able to capitalize on that and move forward. And I must say, for me, it was a very humbling experience because we were the first government agency ever to win Employer of Choice. And generally, we rub shoulders against the private sector, and we came out on top. And I must thank God and my board, my chair lady, Madam Joanne Young, as well as our board of commissioners. They've been very supportive, and the team at FCCC.
Well, commendations on that. Now, hopefully around the country there's going to be other organizations taking their lead from you. But let's, since we've got very little time left, this is our final segment. Let's talk about your partnership with the Projects Abroad Fiji in helping to develop robust engagement programs.
Yes, so Projects Abroad is an organization that brings in volunteers to help with FCCC's awareness programs. Now, people just generally in Fiji, or especially in the government space, when you talk about awareness, it's about somebody turning up to a few people, having some PowerPoint slides and saying, this section of the Act says you must do this, and that section of the Act says you must do that. That's not real awareness, you know. There's a difference between presentation and training. There's a difference between doing a PowerPoint presentation and building capacity and empowering people. And we recognize that. So we've partnered with Projects Abroad, and most recently there's a farmers carnival in Lautoka. Believe you me, the FCCC booth was the most visited booth. What we did was provided competition to the face painting guy down the stall. Okay. We were doing free face painting. People were coming in, and children were pulling their parents. And while the children were getting the face painted, we managed to do some awareness with the parents and said, you know, you're here, you must ask for receipts, you must do this. You know, we talked to them about consumer guarantees, warranties. They came in and gave submissions, the EFL submissions, and they organized those egg and spoon races and all those things. So they bring with them innovation. The country director, Karishma, she's a very dynamic person. She's also come on board and said, we'll go at it. And so we signed an agreement with them. We're looking at it and testing it as a pilot as to how it's going to work. In the next financial year, which is August onwards, we are thinking of rolling it out generally out across schools all over Fiji to see to be able to empower the next generation of Fijians to become more savvy consumers.
Well, Mr. Evram, so much going on with the FCCC. We'd love to have more time, but unfortunately that's the end of our show. We wish you all the best in the future endeavors.
Thank you, sir.
And thanks for joining us on tonight's show. We'll be back next week. Good evening.